Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I posted on entitled parents for this woman before, and I thought that was it. But it got worse. So I like to ride my bike with my aunt around my neighborhood, and a couple nights ago, I realized I live by Karen, which I think is the same Karen that tried to steal my dog. Here are the characters. Me. You know who? My aunt. And let's not forget our wonderful people that tried to kill me. Entitled mother. A really entitled bitch. Entitled kid. Her spawn. Okay, here we go. So me and my aunt were riding our bikes and we saw a house with pretty decorations. So we decided to slow down so we look at the decorations longer. We saw a woman come out the house with the decorations and she got into her car. She looked a bit irritated, but we didn't think of it much. We decided to stop so she could get out of driveway and go where she needs, and then entitled kid comes out and jumps in the car with her. We waited and waited and waited. The car lights were on and the car did not move. It must have been like 10 minutes at this point, so our feet went back on the pedals and we decided to start moving at a slow pace, and then the car moved out of the driveway fast, but luckily we were not in the way. She turns her car to look at us and we don't know what she's doing, but we just decide to get closer to the sidewalk, assuming she had a bad day, until she rolls down her window and yells at us, entitled, "Mother, why are you spying on us?" My aunt and I looked at each other's back at her again. We were heckin' confused. My aunt, "Ma'am, we were not spying on you. We were looking at your decorate." Entitled mother. "Yeah, right? That's what the creeps say nowadays. Now get off our property or else I'm calling the police." We just decided to move on with our bike ride, but entitled mother blocks our way. My aunt. Now, my aunt is very short-tempered, and I didn't want this to go farther, so I gestured to my aunt to follow me, and I kind of went a centimeter above her driveway, and she freaked out. Entitled mother. "Just what are you doing?" I thought I could trust kids. At this point, people were coming out of their houses to see what was going on. Now, I was kind of shocked, by the way. She yelled at me, so I was just in the middle of her driveway, frozen, looking at her car. She looked around at the people coming out the houses, and she must have thought that people were on her side, so she drove back her car, pointed straight at her driveway in the middle, and proceeded to go forward towards me. People were yelling, screaming at her to stop, and for some reason, I felt like something kind of pushed me, and I fell on my side, and my bike proceeded to go forward from the wind, and I got up and ran like a donkey towards my aunt. As her car passed by my leg, I saw that my aunt had her phone pin pointed at entitled mother's car, but not by her license plate, not her, but the car. I thought she was calling the police at first, but she had her phone sideways, and at that moment, I realized what she was doing. She must have been spooked the last time we saw entitled mother at the dog beach, trying to steal my aunt's dog away from her, so she was recording her trying to hit me. She ended her recording and dialed something and held it to her ear. She obviously was calling the cops. And guess what? I passed out on a lawn that was not owned by me. I believe I just passed out from the terror and the overwhelming relief that went through my body. I asked what happened after that, and my aunt said that entitled mother got out of the car and started yelling at me, saying to get off her property and blah, 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 and police got there in 2 minutes, and then ambulance was called and took me in the ambulance, and I got some treatment, but not a lot since I was only passed out. The police arrested entitled mother, and after her attempt to steal a dog and almost kill me, she was sentenced with 15 years in jail and 4 hours of community service. Soon after, a guy came out. My aunt assumed that the dad came out and escorted entitled kid back in the house. I hope I never see entitled mother again. She was a really mean bitch. So, I've got an acquaintance, Richard, who has always been of the I know better than you school of thought. What makes it worse is that he literally received his PhD in physics from one of my country's top universities about 6 months ago, so he's not a dummy. The problem is that he thinks that because he's a physics genius, that means he knows better than everyone about everything. Just an example, my kids are in Montessori schools. This is a decision my wife and I reached together, and we're very happy with it. When he heard, he went on a 30-minute rank lecture about how we're throwing our money away and Montessori is nonsense. When I told him that I had read and even professionally translated studies proving the opposite, and gave him some real-world examples, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, Jeff Bezos, Larry Page, etc., he still would not admit he might not be 100 correct. Not the subject of this revenge, but so you understand the person we're dealing with. Another thing that's important to note is that Richard does not have Asperger's or anything similar. We joke about this all the time, and he's been tested from here until next week. He's just a really smart, socially oblivious pain in the ass. Given all of the above, I try to limit my time with him, but unfortunately, that isn't always possible. And last week, we were both at the same group drive for a friend, Jack, who was visiting back home from overseas. I've known Jack since grade school, so we brought our families and made it more than just a long time. No see type of thing. At some point later on in the afternoon, my eldest, awesome, younger than 10 years old, came to me really sad and said she wanted to go home. When I asked her why, she said that Richard had just spent 15 minutes telling her that she shouldn't eat hot dogs because they're unhealthy, and he explained what went into hot dogs and what they're made out of. Awesome is not a vegetarian, knows that the beef and chicken she eats used to be live animals, and has never professed interest in vegetarianism. At the same time, when a kid is eating a hot dog, they don't care or want to know what's inside. We spoke a bit. I calmed her down and I told her to ignore Richard and go play with her siblings and her friends. Being a kid, she was thankfully easily distracted by something else and moved on. I didn't want to make a fuss with Jack or with Richard, so I just let it be. This turned out to be a mistake. About 30 minutes later, I heard Awesome scream and began crying. I ran over to her. Richard had come up to her and knocked her hot dog out of her hand, saying she shouldn't eat that garbage. I handed Awesome over to my wife for damage control, and I took Richard aside and told him that, A, you don't ever talk to a man's kids without permission. B, you don't ever teach a man's kids without permission. And C, you sure don't ever touch a man's kids without permission. He doesn't have kids, so I still wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. This turned out to be a mistake. Instead of doing the mature thing and moving on, he decided to double down on the hot dog issue. This was the hill he was going to die on. My kids shouldn't be eating hot dogs. Keeping Jack in mind, I disengaged and told him to stay away from my family. I kept my eye on him, and he didn't come near them. Jack enjoyed it. We all ate some good meat. End of the story as far as I'm concerned. This turned out to be a mistake. A few days later, we received a visit from a child protection officer who claimed that we were neglecting our kids, specifically Awesome. She came in and saw that while the house could have been cleaner, what house with kids is spotless? Everything was fine. She sat with Awesome for a few minutes and asked her some questions, said everything was fine, and left. First thing I did was call a friend of mine who is a lawyer, just to be on the safe side. He said it looked to him like we were in the clear, but we should keep in touch with him just in case. Next, I began working the grapevine. It turned out that Richard had been offended by how I treated him after the hot dog incident, so he filed a false anonymous report. Being Richard, and never thinking he could ever be wrong, he was even talking about it as if people should be proud of him for what he did. I had to make sure though, so the last thing I did before dropping the hammer on him was confronting him personally. I set my phone to record and went to his house. He doubled down yet again, saying we were torturing Awesome. He's the one who called protective services on us, and he'd do it again in a heartbeat. This turned out to be a mistake. I'm not the violent type, but I swear I wanted to break the son of a witch in half. I told him that if he came near myself or anyone in my family again, I'd have a restraining order put out on him, and I'd make sure every single one of our shared acquaintances knew why. I listened to the recording in my car, and his admission that he filed a false report came out clear as day. I immediately forwarded it to my lawyer, who said he'll get the ball rolling with some friends of his with the public prosecutor to see if we could get Richard in trouble, using his admission. Still waiting on that, the wheels of justice turn slowly sometimes. Then, I enacted my actual revenge. See, after he got his PhD, Richard bragged about the new flat he'd be moving into as soon as he sold his current flat. To that end, he renovated most of his current flat, including putting in lots of new and expensive features that required lots of electrical work. He did the same in his new flat. He did most of the electrical work himself, which is a big no unless you're licensed. I called in an inspector on both of his flats, who asked to see certification on who did the electrical work. Obviously, there was no certification. It wouldn't surprise me if Richard being Richard, he began arguing with the inspector that his work was good enough and he didn't need to pay someone else to do it for him. I haven't seen or spoken to Richard since, but I've heard that he had to bring in a certified electrician to examine every single change he made in both flats. This meant dismantling everything and having it inspected. Turns out, the buyers of his old flat weren't happy with the delay in receiving the keys, and were even unhappier when they learned why there was a delay. They walked away from the deal and are taking him to court. Because his sale fell through, he's now in the hole paying mortgages on 2 flats. I don't know if there was a fine levied against him, but I sure as hell hope so. Lesson of the story: you don't ever mess with a man's kids. My husband passed away 2 years ago. He was a remodeler who had a broad list of clients. For a time, to help out the adult daughter, let's call her Kiki, of my good friend of 42 years, he would hire her as a helper on some of his larger remodeling projects. During that time, Kiki would occasionally borrow things for her own projects: a portable CD player, a pair of channel locks, a winch comb, a long, a table saw, chainsaw, a Graco cart paint sprayer, and an air compressor and nail gun. They were all borrowed clean, in working order, in good condition with all relevant parts included. Every single one of them was returned with great delays, all broken and missing significant parts, and a crap ton of excuses. Over 2 years, Kiki managed to cost him nearly $5,000 in losses. Finally, he also quit hiring her as a helper because he caught her stealing from one of his clients and forced her to put the item she took right back, and then kicked her off the job immediately. Last September, I was visiting me and Kiki was there. And then Kiki hit me up for what she called her promised inheritance, which was the first I ever heard about it. Given that my hubby and I spent the 8 years of his terminal illness talking about what he wanted after his death, given that he gifted things of his that he wanted friends to have before he died, I knew damn well he didn't intend for Kiki to have anything. My husband left no will. Amy knew that my hubby had quit lending her tools after getting the car paint sprayer back. It was a $1,200 purchase and was less than 4 months old when it was borrowed and returned, broken in ways the warranty would not cover. Amy also knew Kiki's attempted theft had caused him to refuse to have her work on anything with him for any reason. Amy was also a victim of her daughter stealing from her as well. Now, our state is a community property state. When a spouse dies without a will, only the surviving spouse inherits. So Amy told her daughter to back off, and I got the bright idea of how I was going to handle getting rid of all that broken stuff which was still taking up room in the tool shed. So I told her I'd be sure to pick something out. For her, even though her own behavior was the root cause of the bad blood between herself and my husband. So the next day, with Amy's help, I dropped off all the broken tools and the busted up CD player Kiki borrowed from my hubby at her apartment. Kiki wanted to know what I expected her to do with all of it. I told her that I expected her to do with them whatever it was she had expected my hubby to do with them after she returned them in the condition they were in. Now, she is the proud owner of a bunch of useless tools, and I gotta reclaim nearly 35 square feet of space in what is now my tool shed. I used to be a Starbucks barista. We had a woman who would come in every morning and order a double tall vanilla latte with 3/8 pump of vanilla. Not a half a pump. 3/8 is a pump. She even made one of the baristas mark our bottle pump with a Sharpie. Every single day, the first cup we would make, no matter who made it, was always wrong. Either too sweet or not sweet enough. So after a while, I began to just pretend to make another drink, pulled the steam wand and waved my hands about like a fool behind the machine. I would hand her back the same drink we made her the first time, and it was always perfect the second time, even though it was the same drink. On my last day of work, this woman decided to come in twice that day. She was being over obnoxious and talking on her cell phone about deals and her assistants, and essentially just announcing her importance to everyone in the room. It was 3:0 in the spring, and the place was filled with teenagers ordering frappuccinos. I had both blenders going and both steam wands going when this woman decided to yell at me. God, I can barely hear myself think. So I replied, funny, I can still hear you complaining. If you knew me, You'd know I have the perfect facial expressions to go with it. I look like a snarky little shit. I told her that I've been handing her back the same drink every morning for over a year too. I said verbatim, kinda embarrassing now that you know, right? 3/8 is half a pump for all intents and purposes here, man. She lost it. She demanded my manager fire me on the spot or she'd call corporate and we'd lose her business. Blah, blah, blah. I hated my manager. He was the opposite of OI, spirit of the rules, law kind of person, and really enjoyed making our lives more difficult than they needed to be. I knew that firing me actually reflects quite negatively on his quarterly reviews, and knew he wouldn't do it. He told her it was my last day and the best he could do was send me home early, which would be a reward rather than a punishment since the store was so busy. She proceeded to spend the next 2 hours on hold with corporate outside. Then when corporate either accidentally hung up on her or told her to shove it, she threw her glasses, called me a little witch in front of a ton of kids, and ran to her car, to her husband. So sorry for that night, bro. Totally my fault.
And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching and see you next time.